Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The sterile hallway of Genesis Private Hospital echoed faintly with hurried footsteps and muffled cries of newborns. Maxwell Cole stood alone, arms crossed tightly, his designer coat soaked with tension. His jaw tightened as a nurse emerged and gestured toward him. "Mr. Cole, congratulations, it's a girl," she said softly, almost apologetically. A pause hung in the air. Maxwell didn't smile, didn't move. Instead, his eyes darkened with a storm of disappointment. He turned his head slowly toward the door, beyond which lay his partner, Agnes Nwoke, and the infant he had not wanted. Not like this, not a girl. He had built his legacy for a son, a strong heir to carry his name, his empire, his ambitions. A girl. To him, she was nothing more than a disruption. "I asked for privacy," he said coldly, brushing past the nurse and walking straight into the room. Inside, the glow from the bedside lamp bathed Agnes in a fragile light. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes glowed with something deeper, love. She cradled the tiny child against her chest, gently humming a lullaby between tears and breathless awe. "She's perfect, Max," she whispered, tears clinging to her lashes. "Just look at her." But Maxwell didn't move closer. He didn't look. He stood stiffly, hands in his pockets, like he'd stepped into a stranger's room by mistake. "You should rest," he said curtly. "We'll talk later." Agnes blinked, confused, hurt. "Max, she's your daughter, our daughter." He didn't respond. He simply turned, walked to the door, and exited as silently as he had entered. Outside, he gripped the railing with white knuckles and looked out at the night beyond the window, his thoughts already racing. How to erase this? How to fix what, to him, had gone wrong? Down the hall, the faint cry of a newborn rose and fell like a warning in the wind. The rain poured in sheets, relentless and blinding as Maxwell Cole gripped the steering wheel of his black SUV. His eyes remained fixed on the winding road ahead, headlights slicing through the fog that clung to the hills surrounding Lagos's coastal cliffs. The baby, barely 2 days old, rested in a hospital-issued white blanket on the passenger seat, whimpering weakly. Her cries hadn't stopped since they left, but Maxwell didn't glance her way. He drove in silence, jaw clenched, as though the sound of her life offended him. "This ends tonight," he muttered under his breath. He had rehearsed this moment. He'd withdrawn the cash, silenced Agnes with a fabricated tale of a stillbirth, and slipped out before anyone could question his authority. Maxwell didn't believe in mistakes, only solutions. And this, to him, was necessary. She was not the legacy he had built his empire for. The car slowed to a crawl near the edge of the cliff, where the wild sea roared hungrily below. Thunder cracked, startling the baby into a sharper cry. Maxwell cut the engine and stepped out into the storm, scooping the bundle from the seat. Water soaked his shirt instantly, but he held the infant tight, though not with affection. "You weren't supposed to happen," he whispered, staring into her squinting eyes. "You were never part of the plan." The waves below crashed against jagged rocks, indifferent and brutal. He inhaled sharply, looked around, empty. Isolated. No one would see. No one would know. With one final breath, he leaned forward and let go. The bundle dropped from his hands like a forgotten object, vanishing into the night's fury. He stepped back, drenched, and walked to his car. Behind him, unseen through the veil of rain, a flicker of headlights in a parked sedan illuminated two horrified faces. Angela and Tony Obi sat frozen in the car, hands trembling, unable to process what they had just witnessed. "Tony," Angela whispered, voice breaking. He threw a baby." Tony leapt out of the vehicle before Angela could stop him, skidding down the muddy slope toward the cliffside. "She's gone, Tony." "You'll fall!" Angela cried, grabbing the flashlight from the glove compartment and hurrying after him. But her husband was already scaling the rocks, guided by instinct and something more primal, hope. The sea thrashed below like a beast, but in its rhythm, a faint cry pierced the wind. "Over there!" Angela shouted, flashing the beam of light toward a jagged shelf below. Clinging to a knot of seaweed and rock was the small white bundle, battered but miraculously intact. "She's alive!" Tony screamed, voice cracking as he clawed his way down. Salt spray lashed his face as he cradled the tiny body, heart thundering with relief as the baby's cry grew louder. You held on, little one. You held on. Angela reached them moments later, soaked and breathless, falling to her knees beside them. She touched the baby's forehead, cold, but her skin flushed with life. Tears spilled down her cheeks, mingling with the rain. She's a miracle, she whispered. She shouldn't have survived that, but she did. Tony wrapped his jacket around the child, shielding her from the wind. We can't take her to the authorities, he said, glancing back up at the cliff. What we saw, that man, he didn't want her found. Angela nodded slowly, heart pounding. Then we take her. We raise her. We protect her. God gave her back to the world for a reason, and we're not letting her vanish again. She looked down at the infant's eyes, still blinking through raindrops. We'll name her Blossom, she said quietly, because she bloomed through the storm. By dawn, the obis arrived at a small clinic in a neighboring town, soaked to the bone and clutching the tiny girl swaddled in towels. The nurse on duty raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as Angela gently laid the baby on the examination table. She was left on our porch, Angela said, voice steady. We didn't know what to do, but she needs help. The lie settled into the room like fog, and Tony shifted uncomfortably as the nurse scribbled notes. The baby's temperature was low, but she was breathing steadily. After hours of observation and rehydration, the doctor announced, she's going to be all right. Whoever left her, thank God you found her in time. The words weighed heavily. They hadn't just found her, they had saved her. And now a decision loomed over them like an unspoken pact. Later that evening, back in their modest flat, Angela stared at the child sleeping in a makeshift cradle lined with old towels. We can't let anyone know, she said quietly. If that man finds out, Tony nodded, pacing slowly. We'll have to move. New area. Start over. No records, no trail. Angela sat down, exhausted but resolute. Then that's what we'll do. She's ours now, Tony. God didn't put her in our path just to lose her again. Her voice trembled as she added, I didn't think I'd ever hold a child. Not after all the miscarriages. But look at her. Tony crouched beside her, eyes moist as he took Angela's hand. We'll make a life for her. A good one. As night fell, the name Blossom whispered through their home like a prayer. She had no papers, no past, only the love of two people who had chosen to make her their own. The room had grown unbearably quiet. Only the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the low hum of fluorescent lighting kept Agnes tethered to reality. Hours had passed since Maxwell's chilling exit, and no nurse had returned. Her arms, empty now, twitched from memory, aching for the warmth of her daughter. A young resident finally entered, his voice barely audible. Miss Nwoke, I'm so sorry. The baby didn't make it. Agnes froze. What? She croaked, her lips dry, eyes bloodshot. That's not true. I held her. She was breathing. I heard her cry. The resident glanced at his chart, then away. There was a complication. Your partner gave consent for a transfer, but Agnes shot upright despite her weakness. Where is she? I want to see her. The doctor's silence was answer enough. The walls of the room caved in on her, and her scream ripped through the air like something primal. In the days that followed, Agnes was a shell of herself. Maxwell did not return to the hospital. A plain-faced legal aide showed up instead, offering her a check and a rehearsed condolence. Mr. Cole instructed us to ensure you are comfortable during your recovery. He's traveling. Agnes stared at the envelope, then at the woman. Tell him comfort is not a currency. Tell him I want the truth. The woman blinked, unsure how to respond, then placed the envelope on the tray and left in silence. Agnes clutched her abdomen that night, weeping into her pillow until sleep came as a mercy. She didn't know how, but something felt wrong. There had been no paperwork, no burial, no closure. Only Maxwell's cold silence and the aching suspicion that her child hadn't died, but had been stolen from her. In the stillness of dawn, she whispered a name she had never gotten to give. Amara. My beautiful Amara. Somewhere deep inside, she refused to believe her daughter was gone. Years passed, and with them came a new life, small, quiet, but meaningful. The coastal town of Ajiron welcomed the obus-like sea accepts the tide, slowly but without resistance. Angela kept a low profile, running a home-sewn fabric stall in the local market. Tony worked at a mechanic's yard, his hands always stained with grease, but his eyes always soft when he came home to the sound of Blossom's babble. By the time she turned 6 months old, Blossom had become the sun in their lives. Her laughter, infrequent at first, now echoed like music in their cramped flat. On a morning painted with sunlight, Angela knelt by the cot to change Blossom's cloth when it happened. Her daughter's lips parted in the gentlest curve, a smile blooming on her tiny face like her name promised. Angela gasped, covering her mouth in awe. "Tony," she smiled. She just smiled at me. Tony rushed in, hands still greasy, and knelt beside his wife. "Blossom, sweetheart, do it again for Papa." And as if she understood, Blossom giggled and smiled again, this time lifting her arms toward him. Tony swept her into his arms, holding her close, whispering, "You're our miracle, baby girl." They had little, no visitors, no extended family, no friends they fully trusted, but they had Blossom, and with her came color. Angela often journaled after long days, recording each new word Blossom learned, each habit she picked up. "She hums when she sleeps," she once wrote, like a little bird dreaming of freedom. Though they avoided questions from neighbors and dodged routine registration protocols, their home was filled with genuine warmth. At night, as the wind hummed through their cracked windows, the family of three lay side by side on their floor mattress, hearts stitched together by a secret only they shared. Angela would sometimes whisper, "You were meant to be ours," and Tony would always add, "And we were meant to protect you." When Blossom turned 7, her questions became sharper, her eyes more searching. She had inherited Tony's quiet thoughtfulness and Angela's emotional intuition. One evening after school, she watched her reflection in the mirror for a long time, then turned to her mother at the kitchen counter. "Mummy, why is my skin darker than yours?" Angela paused mid-stir. The soup bubbled beneath her wooden spoon, but her mind raced. "You're just kissed by the sun more, baby," she said softly. Blossom narrowed her eyes. "Is that why I don't look like Daddy either?" The words hung heavily in the air. Tony, sitting nearby, shifted uncomfortably, the newspaper in his hands forgotten. Angela knelt before Blossom and tucked a lock of her daughter's hair behind her ear. "Families don't always look the same, love. But we love the same, don't we?" That night, Angela and Tony lay in bed, silent between them. "She's asking now," Angela finally said. "What do we tell her?" Tony exhaled deeply. "Nothing. Not yet. She's still young. But she knows, Tony. She senses it. And children don't forget when you lie to them." "We're not lying," he insisted. "We're protecting her from a past that could kill her if it ever catches up." Angela wiped her eyes. "I hate living in fear. I hate looking over my shoulder. But I'd do it forever if it means keeping her safe." In the darkness, Blossom stood quietly just beyond their door, her small fingers pressed to the wood, listening. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. There was a secret, something big, something about her. And as she climbed back into bed that night, she whispered a promise into her pillow. "One day, I'll find out who I really am." Blossom sat at the edge of the classroom, her desk neatly arranged, her notebooks pristine. She had an unusual calmness for a child her age, watchful, thoughtful, never loud. Her teacher, Miss O'Jean, often remarked that Blossom's essays read like someone twice her age had written them. But that wasn't what made her different. It was the way she noticed things. The way a classmate flinched when his father arrived late, the way her friend Eve always shared lunch but never smiled. One afternoon, as the children laughed in the courtyard, Blossom noticed a boy named Temmie being shoved by 3 older pupils behind the water tank. Without thinking, she marched over, stood between them, and said firmly, "You don't hurt people who haven't hurt you." The older boys snickered, but her eyes didn't waver. Something in her stillness unsettled them, and they backed off. Blossom turned to Temmie. "Next time, don't let them corner you. Speak louder." Later that day, Miss O'Jean summoned her after class. "Blossom, I heard what happened. You were very brave." Blossom shrugged. "I just didn't like how they looked at him." The teacher sighed. "You remind me of someone who never let unfairness slide." But not everyone saw Blossom's boldness as a virtue. A week later, she was reprimanded by the vice principal for interfering during a disciplinary incident when she challenged a teacher who punished a classmate for something they didn't do. "That's not justice," she had said in front of the class, her voice unwavering. The vice principal called Angela in. "She's too outspoken for a girl her age," he warned. At home, Angela scolded her gently. "You have to choose your battles wisely." Blossom looked up at her. "What if they're all important?" Tony, watching from the corner, felt a strange stir in his chest. Their daughter had a mind sharpened by fire and a heart tuned to injustice. And they both knew, one day, that would take her far beyond the walls of that modest school. It was during Harmattan season when Blossom discovered the envelope. She had been digging through a chest in search of her school project materials when a thick brown envelope slipped out from behind an old stack of books. Curious, she opened it slowly. Inside were yellow documents. An article clipping with a bold headline, "Mysterious Incident at Coal Wharf," "Infant Disappearance Rumored," a grainy image of a man stepping into a black car. His face was sharp, lips tight, eyes shadowed beneath his brow. She couldn't explain why, but the name Maxwell Cole burned itself into her mind. There was something familiar in the lines of his jaw, something cold that echoed in her dreams. Below the article was a faded photo of a baby blanket, stained and tattered. It didn't make sense. Why would her parents keep this? Angela found her sitting on the floor with the article spread out in her lap. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice taut with fear. Blossom looked up, her face unreadable. "Why do you have this, Mum?" Angela hesitated, then knelt slowly. "That's from a long time ago. A man who did terrible things. I kept it because I didn't want to forget." "Why would you want to remember something terrible?" Blossom asked. Angela's mouth opened, then closed. "Because some things shouldn't be forgotten, even if they hurt." Blossom nodded but said nothing more. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the name Maxwell Cole playing in her mind like a whispered echo. She didn't know yet how he was connected to her, but instinct told her it wasn't random. She pulled the article from under her pillow and folded it carefully. Whatever it meant, it was a clue. She could feel it in her bones, and she wasn't ready to let it go. It began with a crash, the sound of glass shattering in the kitchen. Blossom rushed out to find Angela crouched on the floor, hands trembling as she picked up the broken pieces of a drinking glass. "I'm fine," Angela murmured, but Blossom could see the tears swimming in her eyes. In the next room, Tony was on the phone, his voice low and frantic. "We can't afford that kind of surgery. I'm begging you, give us time." Blossom stood silently between them, sensing the storm no one wanted to name. That evening, she overheard the full truth. Tony's back injury had worsened after years at the auto shop, and surgery was the only option left. But the cost would cripple them. Angela suggested selling their shop tools. Tony resisted. "If I stop working, we'll lose everything." Blossom felt the weight of helplessness for the first time. At dinner, she barely touched her food. "Is it because of me?" she asked suddenly. "Am I why we can't afford anything?" Tony and Angela froze. "Don't ever say that," Angela said quickly, reaching across the table. "You're the reason we keep going." But Blossom saw the fear in their eyes, the kind of fear that came from hard choices and closed doors. Later, she tiptoed into their room and left the small piggy bank she'd been saving for school materials on the bedside. Inside was only a few hundred naira, but it felt like her entire world. She curled up on the couch and cried quietly, knowing even if they never said it, she was part of their burden. She wanted to help. She just didn't know how yet. The rain fell steadily that afternoon, soft and rhythmic against the rusted zinc roof of the Obi household. Blossom had been assigned the task of clearing out the storeroom, a cluttered space of forgotten things, frayed curtains, old pots, and yellowed notebooks. Beneath a stack of worn envelopes, her fingers brushed against a sealed wooden box with an unfamiliar lock. Curiosity prickled through her chest. She used a hairpin to ease it open, and inside, a bundle of documents lay carefully wrapped in a towel. Her heart pounded as she opened them. First, a crumpled birth certificate with the name Amara Nwoke scrawled across the top. Beneath it, the words, "Mother Agnes Nwoke." No mention of a father. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out a faded hospital wristband and, tucked at the bottom, the same baby blanket she'd once seen in the newspaper clipping. Angela walked in seconds later, startled to find Blossom kneeling in silence. Documents spread before her like sacred text. Where did you get that? Her voice cracked. Blossom didn't answer. Her eyes met Angela's with something more than confusion, hurt, accusation, fear. Amara Nwoke, is that me? Angela slowly stepped forward, sinking to her knees. You were found abandoned, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't know your name. We didn't know who your parents were. So you named me Blossom, Blossom murmured, her throat tightening. But you knew there was more. You kept it from me. Angela's tears fell freely now. We were trying to protect you. The world you came from was cruel. Blossom rose to her feet, papers still clutched in her hands. And you thought a lie would make me safer? Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could be. That night, Blossom didn't sleep. The documents sat beside her bed like a weight she couldn't shake. In the silence, the old nightmares returned, only now they made sense. In her dreams, she was always falling, trapped in darkness, water closing around her like a fist. She would wake gasping, heart pounding, fingers cold. At school the next day, she drifted through lessons, her mind caught between a name she never knew and a truth she didn't ask for. During lunch, she sat beside her closest friend, Chica. Do you ever feel like your life didn't really start where you thought it did? She asked. Chica blinked. What kind of question is that? Blossom didn't respond. She stared at the trees, her thumb rubbing against the inside of her wrist, where the phantom of a hospital tag now lived. That evening, she approached Tony in the backyard, where he sat repairing a broken generator. Did you know who I was before you found me? Her voice was soft but steady. Tony paused, wrench in hand, then set it down. We only knew what we saw, a child tossed away like she didn't matter. That was all we needed to know. But you kept records. You kept her name. Tony looked up at her, his eyes weary. I didn't keep it because I needed to remember where you came from. I kept it because I couldn't forget what someone tried to take from you. Blossom sat beside him, the hum of dusk surrounding them. I need to find her, my birth mother. Agnes. The name felt foreign yet familiar on her tongue. Tony nodded slowly. If that's the path your heart needs to walk, we won't stop you. But promise us one thing. What? She asked. That no matter what you find out, you don't forget who you became because of love. She reached for his hand and squeezed it, her eyes glassy. I couldn't forget that if I tried. Angela stood at the kitchen sink, slicing yams, when Blossom walked in and placed the birth certificate and blanket on the counter. I need the full truth, she said. No emotion, no anger, just quiet insistence. Angela stared at the items, then slowly turned off the tap. Her shoulders sagged as if someone had removed the scaffolding holding her together. We weren't supposed to see it, she said. We were just driving home that night. Then we saw him. Blossom didn't ask who. She waited. Angela continued, her voice shaking. A man in a black car, standing on the edge of a cliff. He was holding something, someone. Her lips quivered. We didn't know it was a baby until we saw the blanket fall. Tony ran. He got to you just in time. Blossom's eyes widened. He threw me? Someone threw me? Angela nodded, tears streaming. Yes, and we never told anyone. We were afraid he'd come back for you. A man who could do that once might do it again. Blossom collapsed into a chair, stunned. Why would someone do that to a baby? Angela sank down beside her, gripping her hand. Because he didn't see you as a child. He saw you as a mistake. Blossom's voice shook. And you just took me. We claimed you, Angela corrected. We chose you, Blossom. Not because we pitied you, but because we loved you. From the second you survived that fall, you were our daughter. Angela reached out and touched Blossom's cheek. But I knew this day would come, the day you'd want to find the pieces. Blossom leaned into her, shoulders trembling. Thank you for catching me, for holding me all these years. Angela kissed her forehead. We didn't save you, Blossom. You saved us. And there, in the quiet sanctuary of their kitchen, mother and daughter wept, not because of what was broken, but because of what had held them together for so long. The smell of fresh paper and ink filled the air as Blossom sat in the corner of the small community library, poring over a thick criminal law textbook twice her size. She had come here almost every day after school for weeks now, drawn not just by curiosity, but by a need that burned deeper than she could name, the need to understand justice, fairness, consequence. After discovering the truth about her past, the world no longer looked like a place of balance. It looked like a chessboard of powerful players and forgotten pawns. And she refused to be a pawn. Law is the voice of those who can't shout, the textbook read, and Blossom underlined it 3 times. When the librarian asked if she was researching for a school assignment, Blossom simply replied, "I'm researching for my life." That night, over dinner, she looked up from her plate and announced, "I want to be a lawyer." Angela blinked, surprised. "That's a big dream." Tony nodded. "A noble one, too." Blossom leaned forward. "I want to make sure no one can ever do what was done to me, what almost happened to me, and get away with it." Silence followed, not of disagreement, but of awe. Angela reached across the table. "Then we'll make it happen. Even if we have to work double shifts, even if we sell what we own, you'll have your seat in that courtroom." Over the next few months, Blossom worked harder than she ever had: grades, scholarships, essays, interviews. Every rejection only sharpened her resolve. When the admission letter finally came from Law University of Ibadan, Angela held it in shaking hands, whispering through tears, "You've already changed the world, starting with ours." The common room buzzed with laughter as law students gathered around the mounted TV, waiting for the chancellor's address. But Blossom, arms folded and eyes scanning the screen, froze when the headline changed. Cole Foundation launches Urban Justice Project. Businessman Maxwell Cole speaks on equity. There he was, older, grayer, dressed in a bespoke Navy suit, standing at a podium and preaching ethics with a plastic smile. Her chest tightened, breath catching in her throat. "That's him." Her hands trembled, not with fear, but rage. Her classmates clapped politely. One student turned to her, grinning. "That man built half this school's library." "Visionary, right?" Blossom didn't respond. She excused herself quietly and walked to the courtyard where she could breathe. There, alone beneath the jacaranda tree, she replayed his voice in her head. It was smooth, composed, and entirely unrepentant. "How many people cheer for him?" she whispered. "How many call him a hero?" That night in her dorm, she pulled out the faded newspaper clipping once more. It matched the name, the face. The man who had tossed her away like a used receipt was now celebrated as a humanitarian. Her stomach churned. She stared into the mirror and steadied her breath. "He doesn't know me," she said aloud, voice low. "But one day he will. And he'll have to say my name. In a courtroom. Under oath." And with that, she folded the article, slid it back into her folder labeled Future Cases, and started making notes, not on his speeches, but on the cracks in his empire. The first time Blossom entered Judge Miriam Ease's courtroom as an observer, she wasn't expecting to feel anything. But the way Judge Ease commanded the room, with precision, integrity, and calm power, lit something inside her. Miriam didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her intellect did the talking, and her eyes never missed a lie. Blossom stayed long after the session ended, scribbling notes about how the judge handled evidence, body language, pauses. Days later, she summoned the courage to approach her after a lecture. "Ma, I want a clerk under you," Blossom said, holding her transcript like a lifeline. Miriam skimmed it silently. "Your GPA is impressive, but why me?" Blossom hesitated, then replied, "Because you make justice feel like a calling, not a career." The judge tilted her head, then smiled faintly. "Report to my office Monday morning. 6 sharp." From that day forward, Blossom lived in the heart of the legal system. Judge Miriam's chambers became both battlefield and classroom. She taught her how to read between lines, how to dissect a witness without cruelty, and how to stand her ground even when the room tilted. Blossom soaked in everything. Sometimes Judge Ease would test her with mock trials and ask, "What would you do if you were on the bench?" And Blossom, never shy, always answered with reasoned clarity. Miriam was impressed. "You don't just want to win cases," she observed one day. "You want to redefine them." Blossom nodded. "Because justice is more than punishment. It's restoration." Miriam leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowed with pride. "You remind me of someone I used to be before compromise stole her voice." Blossom met her gaze evenly. "Then I'll be the voice you never lost, Ma." And with that, their mentorship was sealed, not just in knowledge, but in conviction. Blossom's first official day as an intern in the federal legal complex was a revelation. While the outside marble walls and polished courtrooms glittered with prestige, the back offices told a different story. File cabinets bursting with ignored petitions, overworked clerks buried in red tape, and lawyers whispering names with caution. Her initial task seemed simple: compile and archive a list of corporate cases from the last decade. But the deeper she dug, the more she saw inconsistencies. Names repeated where they shouldn't have. Judgments reversed without explanation. One file in particular stopped her cold. A fraud case involving a shell company that had mysteriously been dissolved, only to reappear under another name, tied loosely to a C Enterprises. Her breath caught. Coal. Her instincts screamed, but she kept her face neutral. She photocopied the documents and quietly slipped the copies into her personal folder. A few days later, she met with Judge Miriam during lunch break. "Ma," she said carefully, "have you ever noticed how certain cases disappear?" Miriam raised a brow. "Disappear?" Blossom leaned forward. "Files, companies, even trial records. It's subtle, but it's there, like someone's editing history." The judge sighed, eyes dark. "There are ghosts in the system, Blossom. Ghosts with money." Blossom asked, "What if one of those ghosts has a name I know?" Miriam didn't answer directly, but her voice dropped. "The higher you rise, the more dangerous the names become. Learn to protect yourself." That night, Blossom began building her own shadow archive, digital copies, printed evidence, timelines, and links, all leading to a name she was now certain stood at the center: Maxwell Cole. And with every uncovered thread, her resolve grew stronger. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. She was preparing. Years passed like layered chapters in a legal textbook, intense, instructive, and unrelenting. By 29, Blossom had passed the bar, survived cutthroat litigation, and become one of the youngest magistrates in the Southern Circuit. Her name began to circulate, not for flashy speeches or scandals, but for integrity. Her courtroom was quiet, her rules clear. She greeted janitors the same way she did lawyers, and never let theatrics sway her judgment. In one case, a landlord accused a widow of squatting. The facts showed the woman had lived there legally, and her rent was up to date, but the man had altered records. Justice isn't just about documents, Blossom had ruled. It's about dignity. That ruling made headlines, and with it came attention from places she never expected, including government panels and private watchdogs. Late one evening, after court had adjourned, Judge Miriam Ease stopped by her chambers unannounced. She stood by the door, arms folded, pride brimming in her eyes. "They say you remind them of me, but I think you've surpassed that." Blossom rose from her desk, a shy smile breaking across her face. "I wouldn't be here without your fire lighting the way." Miriam chuckled. "Then promise me you'll never put it out, not even when they try to extinguish it." She stepped forward, placed a small velvet box on Blossom's desk, and opened it. Inside lay a finely stitched judicial brooch, worn only by those appointed to sit on the high bench. "The appointment is yours. You've earned it." Blossom's breath caught in her throat. "Ma'i, I don't know what to say." Miriam placed a hand on her shoulder. "Say yes, and wear it with purpose." Blossom nodded slowly. "Yes, and I'll wear it for every girl who was ever silenced." That night, alone in her office, she pinned the brooch to her robe and whispered, "I'm ready." At the National Law Conference in Abuja, the grand ballroom was filled with politicians, scholars, judges, and press. Cameras flashed as keynote speakers took turns on stage, but Blossom's attention sharpened when the final guest was announced. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nathan Cole, Vice Chair of Cole Group International." The crowd applauded as a confident, well-groomed man in his mid-30s took the podium. Blossom leaned forward, analyzing his features. His resemblance to Maxwell was undeniable. Yet something in Nathan's eyes was different. He didn't speak with his father's practiced arrogance. Instead, his voice carried thoughtfulness. "We speak of law as a shield," he said, "but too often it becomes a sword for the powerful. We must repair that balance." The room hushed. Blossom's pulse quickened. Could he know? After his speech, she found herself at the networking mixer, cup of juice in hand, watching Nathan from a distance. He spoke kindly to staff, not performatively. When he caught her gaze across the room, he nodded politely and walked over. "Judge Obi, right? I've read your recent ruling on asylum petitions. Bold work. Blossom blinked, momentarily disarmed. Thank you. Your speech surprised me. He chuckled. Let's just say we don't always choose the name we inherit. Some of us are trying to change what it means. She studied him. Do you believe legacies can be redeemed? Nathan tilted his head. Only if the truth is no longer buried. The air between them crackled with layered meaning. Blossom smiled faintly. Then I hope we're both good at digging. As he walked away, her heart beat harder, not with fear, but curiosity. For the first time, she wondered, was Nathan an ally, or just another shadow? Rain tapped lightly against the window pane of Blossom's office as she sorted through a stack of briefs left by her clerk. She had just ruled on a high-profile custody dispute and was hoping for a quiet evening. But an envelope caught her eye, plain, unmarked, resting innocently atop her legal files. She frowned. Who dropped this off? She asked. Her clerk, a young man named Jide, shook his head. Wasn't here an hour ago. Suspicion prickled beneath her skin. She closed the door, opened the envelope, and slid out a bundle of printed documents. Her hands stilled as she flipped through them. Offshore accounts, internal audits, falsified balance sheets, every page pointed to the same entity, Cole Group Holdings. But it was the last page that stole her breath. A scanned ledger bearing Maxwell Cole's signature, authorizing a payment to a security firm the same year she was born. Blossom sat back, her pulse racing. The pages were too detailed to be fabricated, too specific to be guessed. Someone had given her ammunition, proof of financial crimes, perhaps even a trail to deeper truths. But who? And why now? She scanned the hallway, locked the folder in her secure drawer, and took out her phone. Hello, Judge Miriam? Her mentor's voice answered, alert. Blossom, someone just left me a loaded gun. On paper, Miriam exhaled slowly. Then we proceed carefully. We don't just point and fire. We investigate, verify, and when the moment comes, we strike. That night, Blossom went home with more than just evidence. She carried the burden of knowledge. She didn't know who had pulled the strings to get her this information, but one thing was clear. The time for silence was ending. The federal courtroom buzzed with tension. For weeks, murmurs had been swirling about a long-awaited corruption trial involving multiple corporate giants. But no one had expected Maxwell Cole himself to be summoned, not yet. He sat at the defense table in a tailored suit, still exuding the air of a man who believed the world owed him grace. His lawyers flanked him like a protective wall, but Blossom, sitting at the bench, saw right through the presentation. She had reviewed the anonymous file 10 times, cross-referenced it, verified the signatures. The case wasn't yet about the attempted murder she had lived through, but that day was coming. For now, this trial was about embezzlement, tax evasion, and the intricate web of fraud spun beneath his empire. Mr. Cole, the prosecutor began, can you explain the discrepancy in your 2004 financial declaration versus the 2005 offshore account discovered under Ocelia Holdings? Maxwell leaned in. My companies handle hundreds of global transactions. Discrepancies are common and often clerical. Blossom studied his body language. Calm, calculated, no visible guilt. But beneath his polish was arrogance, a refusal to believe consequences could touch him. During recess, she sat in her chambers, staring at her reflection. Does he know who I am? Would it matter if he did? The trial resumed with witness testimony, including former staff who described shredded reports and bribed auditors. Maxwell's jaw tensed slightly, but still he remained composed. She made her notes silently. She would not reveal herself yet. Not until it mattered most. Because justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about timing. And her moment was coming. In a small village tucked between dusty roads and forgotten railway tracks, an aging woman named Agnes Nwoke sat beneath a mango tree, peeling yam and humming a lullaby. She had aged quietly, her beauty now worn thin by sorrow and solitude. When Samuel Nduka arrived, she mistook him for a missionary. I'm not here to preach, Ma, he said softly. I'm here to tell you something about your daughter. Her knife slipped from her hand. My daughter died, she whispered. Samuel sat gently on the bench beside her. What if I told you she didn't? Agnes gripped the edge of the stool. I held her. I named her Amara. Then one morning they told me she was gone. Samuel nodded. They lied. She lived. Someone saved her. And she's Not just alive. She's a judge. Tears slid down Agnes's cheeks before she could even process the words. "Who is she?" she asked, voice cracking. "Her name is Blossom Obi," Samuel said. "She was raised by good people. She's strong. And she's looking for the truth." Agnes held her hands to her mouth. Does she know I didn't leave her?" Samuel shook his head. "Not yet. But she's ready to meet you." That night, Agnes sat on her wooden bed, her palms flat against her heart. "Amara," she whispered, "my blossom." She didn't sleep. She barely breathed. The world she thought had buried her child had quietly raised her instead, and now, at the dusk of her life, she might finally be allowed to hold her again. Nathan Cole sat in his expansive office, surrounded by accolades and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the heart of Lagos. But none of it brought peace. He had just finished reading an internal memo containing evidence of his father's financial entanglements, transactions traced to shell companies and silent payouts. He'd always suspected his father had secrets, but he hadn't expected the web to stretch this wide. The more he peeled back, the more disturbed he became. His assistant entered, tablet in hand. "Sir, the court has resumed. Maxwell Cole is back on the stand." Nathan nodded, but didn't rise. His thoughts were no longer solely on the empire he'd been groomed to inherit. They were with the young judge presiding over his father's trial, Blossom Obi. Something about her had struck a chord, her calm fire, her piercing clarity. Later that evening, Nathan met with his mother over dinner at a quiet restaurant. She was the only person he trusted completely. "Did Dad ever tell you about a child?" "Before me?" he asked, watching her reaction closely. Her fork paused midair. "Why are you asking that?" "Because I think there's more to this story, Mum. And I think Judge Obi is connected to it." His mother's eyes clouded. "I heard whispers, Nathan, years ago, that there was a child born before you. But when I asked, he shut me down. Said it was a mistake that didn't survive." Nathan exhaled, his suspicion now a slow burn. "That child didn't die, Mum. She's alive. And she's sitting in court, judging him." For a moment, his mother said nothing. Then she whispered, "If that's true, then justice isn't coming. It's already arrived." Nathan knew he had to choose sides, and this time, silence would make him complicit. The courtroom was silent as the final evidence packet was submitted. The prosecution team, led by a meticulous legal mind named Ijeoma Falana, laid out a chain of documents that painted a damning picture of fraud, bribes, and international laundering. Then came the surprise item. "Your Honor," Ijeoma said, handing a sealed evidence envelope to the bailiff, "we request to present a personal item recently authenticated through forensic DNA analysis. It connects directly to the defendant's past." The gallery stirred. Blossom accepted the envelope without comment and opened it carefully. Inside was a photo of a torn, aged baby blanket, tagged with biological residue that matched both Maxwell Cole and one Amara Nwoke, also known by her legal name, Blossom Obi. She took a moment to compose herself before placing the image on the screen for the courtroom to see. Maxwell's face remained unreadable, but his jaw twitched ever so slightly. Ijeoma continued, "This item was discarded at Cole Wharf nearly 3 decades ago, alongside an infant. The event was never reported, but the child survived, and the evidence is irrefutable." Whispers erupted in the gallery. Maxwell's lawyers leaned in, murmuring strategy, but Blossom silenced them with a firm bang of the gavel. Order in the court. Her tone was sharper now, heavier with implication. She looked directly at the man who had once thrown her away. Not a flicker of recognition passed through his eyes, but something deeper, a flicker of unease, surfaced for the first time. In that moment, Blossom realized something profound. He didn't know who she was. Not yet, but soon he would. As the trial approached its conclusion, the final statements were expected to wrap up procedural points. But as the last prosecutor stepped down, Blossom remained silent for a moment longer than usual. Then she rose slowly, removed her glasses, and addressed the courtroom, not as a judge, but as a woman whose voice had waited nearly 3 decades to be heard. "Before we conclude," she began, "the court must acknowledge one final truth. Not a legal point, a personal one." Her voice was clear, firm, but the undertone was raw. 27 years ago, a newborn was abandoned, discarded like trash on a stormy night. No one claimed her, no one searched. But she survived. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. The prosecutors froze. Even Maxwell looked mildly perturbed, his brow furrowed. Blossom stepped down from the bench and moved toward the gallery. "That child is me." A collective gasp rippled through the room. "My name is Blossom Obi, but I was born Amara Nwoke. And the man sitting right there," she turned toward Maxwell, her eyes locked on his, "threw me into the sea." His face turned pale finally. A flicker of memory, maybe denial, maybe shame, washed over his expression. His silence was unbearable. "You tried to kill me," Blossom said, her voice trembling now. "And you failed. I rose, I studied. I judged. And now I sit on the very bench you once believed no child of yours would ever deserve." The gavel fell. Court is adjourned. But justice, finally, was just beginning. The courtroom was no longer just a chamber of law. It had become a crucible of history. Blossom's revelation hadn't only stunned the press and legal teams. It had shattered the air itself. Reporters dropped pens. Observers sat frozen, mouths ajar. But the loudest silence came from Maxwell Cole. For the first time in his career, he had no script. His fingers clutched the edge of the defense table, as if it were the only thing tethering him to the ground. His lawyer whispered, "Sir, do you want to respond?" Maxwell didn't. He simply looked at Blossom, truly looked at her, and something flickered behind his cold exterior. Recognition, regret, or maybe just the dawning realization that his past had returned not with vengeance, but with authority. Nathan Cole stood at the back of the courtroom, stunned. The pieces had fallen into place in seconds, the secrecy, the court's shifting tone, Blossom's poise. He rubbed his brow, overwhelmed. During the recess, he slipped into a hallway corner, phone in hand, and dialed his mother. "Mum," he said breathlessly, "she's his daughter, the one from before me." On the other end, his mother didn't speak for a long time. Then she whispered, "She survived." "Not just survived," Nathan said. "She thrived. And now she's delivering the judgment he thought he'd never face." Back inside, the gallery remained hushed. Blossom returned to the bench without further explanation. The clerk resumed formalities, but nothing felt routine anymore. Everyone now saw Maxwell not as a mogul, but as a man cornered by the truth. And for once he had no power to silence it. News spread like wildfire. National headlines erupted with phrases like, "Judge reveals she was abandoned by defendant," and "Justice served in most personal way." But behind the spectacle was something quieter, Blossom sitting alone in her office, replaying the memories. The salt in her lungs. The fear in Angela's eyes that night, she learned the truth. Tony's bruised hands from climbing slippery rocks. The love they had given her when the world had offered nothing. She sat with a photo of them, faded, worn, but precious. Then a knock. Judge Miriam entered gently. "You didn't just change the course of the trial," she said. "You changed the legacy of justice." Blossom looked up, weary. "I thought I'd feel powerful, but all I feel is hollow." Miriam nodded. "That's because you didn't seek revenge. You sought truth, and truth doesn't gloat. It humbles." Meanwhile, Maxwell's empire crumbled rapidly. Shareholders pulled out. Government agencies launched deeper investigations. More documents surfaced, including an audio recording, his own voice, years ago, captured by a disgruntled aide. "I got rid of her. Don't ask how, just know it's done." The prosecution wasted no time. Charges were updated: attempted murder, obstruction of justice, falsification of documents. His bail was revoked. As he was escorted out of the courthouse in cuffs, Nathan stood nearby, unable to speak. Their eyes met briefly, father and son, and Maxwell's look held no plea for help. "This shame," Nathan turned away. At that moment, the burden of the Cole name shifted. Not onto his shoulders, but into the courtroom that had chosen truth over blood. And Blossom, still seated in her robe, simply breathed. In a quiet garden behind Judge Miriam's private home, Blossom sat on a bench, her robe replaced with a soft blue dress. She looked younger without the weight of court, lighter, but her eyes still carried the storm of years past. Across from her sat Angela and Tony, fingers entwined, watching her as if she were still the baby wrapped in seaweed and miracles. Then came the soft crunch of gravel, and Agnes Nwoke stepped through the archway. Her hands trembled as she approached, her eyes shimmering. Blossom stood. Their gazes met, mother and daughter, strangers bound by memory. Agnes opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I never let go of you. Not in my heart." Blossom stepped closer, tears welling. "I thought you abandoned me." Agnes shook her head, crying now. "I begged to see you. They told me you died. I mourned you every year, every birthday, every night." Angela moved quietly, placing a gentle hand on Agnes's shoulder. "She became everything you dreamed she'd be." Agnes took Blossom's hands, falling to her knees. "Can you ever forgive me?" Blossom knelt with her, embracing her tightly. "You didn't leave me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He did, but you're here now." For a long moment, they held each other, time folding into healing. Tony and Angela watched from a distance, hearts full. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a resurrection. A girl once left to die had found the arms of the woman who never stopped mourning her. The courtroom sat empty, long after the media had moved on and the final ruling had been archived. Blossom remained seated at the bench, her robes neatly folded beside her, a pen between her fingers, and a single document before her, the final judicial report on State versus Maxwell Cole. Her hand hovered as she wrote the closing remarks. No embellishments, no flourish. Just truth. Justice is not vengeance. It is the light that survives darkness and the voice that endures silence. She signed it, then leaned back with a sigh that carried years of weight. On her desk sat a framed photo, Agnes holding her hand from their reunion day, Angela and Tony standing just behind with quiet pride. They were her roots, not bloodlines, not names carved into marble, but the people who caught her when the world cast her away. A knock pulled her back to the present. Judge Miriam stepped in, holding a leather-bound folder. "Judiciary Council just confirmed it," she said, placing it on the desk. Blossom raised a brow. "Confirmed what?" Miriam smiled. "You've been appointed to lead the National Committee on Justice Reform." Blossom blinked. "Me?" "You," Miriam repeated, "because no one else alive knows better what justice really means." Blossom swallowed hard. "Will they respect someone who was once thrown away?" Miriam walked closer. "No, they'll respect someone who walked back in, stronger than anyone expected." As Miriam left, Blossom stood, gathered her robe and folder, and looked out the window. The city sprawled beyond, messy, loud, alive. She had earned her place here, not by legacy, but by survival. She walked out of her chambers, leaving behind the weight of her past, stepping into the purpose she was born to fulfill. The sun painted the sky in hues of gold as Blossom stepped onto the small stage of a community law mentorship seminar. Her speech wasn't on the program. It had been a last-minute invitation from a young organizer who admired her. The room was modest. Students sat on wooden benches, some barefoot, notebooks ready. She smiled gently at them. "I wasn't born in privilege," she began. "In fact, I wasn't even supposed to survive my first day. But here I am, not because life gave me a clear path, but because love found me when I was lost, and justice gave me a voice when I had none." The crowd leaned in, spellbound. "Some of you may feel invisible. Some may carry wounds others can't see. But hear me now, your scars do not disqualify you. They prepare you." After the session, a young law student approached her, slim, wide-eyed, trembling slightly. "Judge Obi?" she asked. "I want to be like you, but I don't even know who I am yet." Blossom knelt to eye level. That's where it begins, with the questions, the ache, the silence, but you keep walking. The girl nodded slowly, encouraged. As Blossom turned to leave, she passed the school's chalkboard. Someone had scribbled in bold white letters, "Hope is a name." She smiled and whispered beneath her breath, "It's also a choice." Outside, the wind carried the scent of dust and jasmine. She felt the weight of the robe over her arm, but it no longer felt heavy. Behind her was a legacy rooted in pain. Ahead of her was a generation she had unknowingly inspired. Her name had once been erased, but now, her name was Blossom, and the world would never forget it. Here's the Bible verse for the story. Genesis 50, verse 20. "But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive." This verse captures the heart of Blossom's journey. Though she was discarded with evil intent, God redirected her life for good, not only for her redemption, but for justice that touched many. Moral of the story: evil may try to bury destiny, but truth, love, and perseverance will always rise. No one's beginning defines their end. Even when the world deems someone unworthy, a single act of compassion paired with courage and integrity can restore what was broken, reveal hidden purpose, and rewrite history. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.